That is not going to happen. This lecture is meant to stretch you a little bit, to get you to thinking theologically about what it means to say, I believe this. Because really that's what theology is. It's understanding what it means to believe. And we have to understand that the things that we say about God, particularly from the pulpit, have a great deal of power. And they can fall heavy on folks. They can lift folks up or they can crush them. When we say, for example, the church I was at this morning, the preacher talked about Romans 8, and here's this wonderful soaring text about nothing can separate us from the love of God. But the preacher wanted to talk more about Paul's idea of predestination and that God had a plan for us, and that everything was a part of God's plan. And she used an interesting example of her grandparents surviving a tornado, and as they were about to get into the bathroom and the bathtub for protection, Grandma was sure she heard a voice that said, go out in the hall. And so they went out into the hallway outside the bathroom, and the house was completely torn apart, and they survived. Had they been in the bathtub, they might not have, based on the way in which the house was torn apart. And she was convinced that, Grandma was convinced that God had saved them, and she'd heard the voice of God. This preacher was convinced that her grandparents were alive because that was God's plan for them. And that all sounds pretty good. Unless you're one of the 169 people who died in Alabama and in Missouri during the outbreak of tornadoes about 6 or 8 weeks ago. For a family who's lost a family member, sitting through that illustration and that sermon today, I think that would have been very difficult. So it was just God's plan that my sister or brother or my mother or father or my child should die in this tornado. That was the plan. What does that say about God? So when we make statements, and when we're talking about evangelism, we're going to start to make some pretty big and broad statements about what we believe about God. We need to understand the full implication of those statements and what they mean to the persons who hear them, and not to assume that every person is in the same place with the same need and the same desire and the same urgency that we perceive them to be, or that someone else was who we've had this conversation with before. I think that's important. Now, again, I said churches that are doing well in evangelism are churches where folks appear to have a very dynamic relationship with God. God is moving, the Spirit is present in the community. You can sense it in worship, you can feel it with the folks when you talk to them. They have a relationship with Jesus, and they want others to experience this joy, this precious relief, this grace, this forgiveness, this empowerment to action. They want others to experience this as well, and so they share it with them. That is evangelism. That's the way it's being done in some of our churches very successfully. Something else, and I think Grace Reese mentions this in her material, is that the folks who are in these communities that are succeeding are folks who genuinely care about each other, that at least in part of the practice of evangelism is the establishment and nurture and care for a caring community, where folks are embraced by one another, valued by one another for who they are, accepted for where they are in the journey, and really cared for by one another. A sense that it's a safe place. Providing that is, I think, perhaps a foundational piece of evangelism. Because what's it going to mean when we bring these folks in? And they're different from us. They don't look like us. They may not speak the same language as their first language as we do. They may come from patterns of addiction or abuse. They may have come from jail. What do we do with folks who are different from us? If we're going to go out and tell this good news, and we're going to do it in a way that's compelling, we're going to draw folks. And those folks are not all going to look like the folks who currently are in the sanctuary. So the caring for each other and the ability to build a caring community seems to be pretty important for the good work of evangelism. Another thing that is noticeable, I think, with churches that are growing and succeeding is that aside from the fact that they're excited about it and they're willing to tell others about it, and they really care for each other, which others see as an attraction model. Remember, we talked about stewardship, we talked about the second chapter of Acts, and how they cared for one another in the community. The transformation that took place was that none had any need, and they were together of one mind, one heart, worshiping with glad and generous hearts, says Luke in that second chapter of Acts. And Festus will later say, look how they love each other, as Paul makes his appeal. The third thing is that they care for people outside of the community, that the folks in churches where they are growing are really doing meaningful mission. Not only are they sharing the faith and talking about the faith and inviting others to the faith, but they're putting that faith into action in real concrete ways and giving people the opportunity to do the same. Where it's not just some sit and listen to a nice message and go home and things are the way they always have been. And I notice that things aren't the way they're supposed to be, and I pray that God will fix that someday. These folks are engaged in the transformational work of the world. Now, doesn't that sound like Disciples, a movement for wholeness in a fragmented world? That they're involved in mission and justice issues that impact the community. They care that the local river is being polluted, and they want it cleaned up, not only for their health, but because they understand that it belongs to God and to the whole community, and they want to be involved, and they give people a chance to express then that same faith. Whatever it is, you can kind of pick your own issue there, but I do think that it's important for us to think about and understand these things. Ultimately, with evangelism, I'm going to come back to this again, that it's the role of the pastor that determines how effective this is going to be. If the pastor doesn't believe in it, first of all, if the pastor doesn't really believe that a relationship with Jesus matters, there's not going to be a lot of evangelism going on. If the faith community and the pastor together don't believe that the Bible is an authoritative guide for life, for an abundant life, for a transformed life, for a better life for those who follow it, that the teachings of Jesus make a difference for us and improve who we are and what the world is like. If we don't believe those things as pastors, as church leaders, we're probably not going to be doing much evangelism in our congregations. There probably isn't going to be much emphasis about that. There's going to be much urgency about that. So in the same way that with stewardship, where we talked about our personal practice of stewardship, our personal discipline of giving, our personal understanding of what it means to be a steward of all that God has given us, it's the same thing with evangelism. These are hand-in-glove kinds of related issues. If we don't practice it, if we're not in a relationship with someone trying to help them discover the joy that Jesus Christ has for them, no matter how upside down their life is, that there is a stabilizing force that won't necessarily make it get better overnight, but will help them better cope with it. If we're not working with folks to do that, then we really can't expect our congregations to do that. They're not going to know how. And there's going to be no one to show them how, by example and by method. So I think that that's real important, and I think as pastors it's important for us to know that it is the work of the people, it is the work of the laos, of the community of faithful, it is the work of the synagogue, the people of God, to do this work of evangelism, because what we notice also in churches that are practicing evangelism is that transformation occurs not just in the people who are being witnessed to, not just in the people who are being invited into relationship with God, not just the people who are being challenged to accept a new way of life and being. Transformation doesn't just happen for them, though it surely does, but it also happens for the people who are practicing it. That by the telling of their faith, by the sharing and giving away of their faith, something rich occurs in their life as well. And so I really, that's really kind of all I'm going to give you this week. You're going to get Matt Majewski's interview that I did with him that I think lays out some very interesting approaches for how to do evangelism, the importance of having something for people to come to that's quality, of being ready to receive folks, the importance of inviting folks. I think you're going to get something from that. You'll get a lot from Grace's reading, and that Grace Reese book, Unbinding the Gospel, has a plan for you to do evangelism with your congregation. You're saying, well, we need some how-to nuts and bolts. Though that's what that book really is about. It's how to lead your group in small groups into a way of knowing your own story, which is essential, and that's where I started with, is what do we believe about God, and what do we believe about Jesus, and what do we believe about salvation? And then being able to articulate that story and then turn that articulation of the story beyond sharing into inviting. And there's a prayer journal, 40-day prayer journal in there that I would really encourage you all to engage in if you're looking for a spiritual discipline. If you're looking for something to help you with your Bible study, with your prayer life, which I think many ministers struggle with, to find ways of doing devotional things outside of sermon prep and classwork. That 40-day journey that she suggests in there is a good one, and it does work out of a group context, and so you could find a partner, maybe a discussion partner from seminary. You could do it online. I mean, that's kind of how we're doing things now. But maybe there's a local person in your congregation or a colleague in ministry you have access to who would work this prayer journal with you and help you work through it before you begin to think about introducing it to your congregation. But the bottom line with evangelism is do you believe you have anything to offer anybody? Do you believe the church has anything to offer? Do you believe that a relationship with God matters, and how does it matter, and why does it matter? And when you get that sorted out, then you can tell people about the good news of Jesus. I pray for you and pray that you will pray for me as we move through this week now exploring evangelism and sharing the faith, as we explore the text where we see that modeled for us in a variety of different ways. But always, it seems to me, with an invitation, a welcome to come and see, and allow God to transform us, allow God to help us fully appreciate what it is that we know about Christ, and to value it in such a way that we would want to share it with others. Blessings to you on this great adventure of ministry. And blessings to you as you think about how it is you share the faith that is in you, that you are working out with fear and trembling in your own relationship with the grace of God. Blessings.